The internet, Fox television, cable, satellite TV, all of it could get wiped out around 2012.
So many people are awakening to cosmic consciousness and higher concepts of metaphysics and spirituality.
Christianity in particular encourages this idea that you are useless and worthless and that your only point is to, serve and worship, etc. So if you actually buy into that wholeheartedly, when you get around to figuring out that there's no good reason to think that it's true and plenty of reasons to think that it's false, that can be worldview shattering.
There's a big difference between disbelieving God claims, not believing that a God exists, and claiming to know, in other words, believing very strongly, and not even believing, but claiming to know and being able to say firmly that nothing that can possibly be called a God could possibly exist.
You're listening to Canary Cry Radio. Now here are your hosts, Basil and Gonz.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Gonz.
And I am Basil.
And you're listening to Canary Cry Radio. Thanks for tuning in. If you caught up with us from Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, or you just visited the website, or if you're going through Revelations Radio Network, we appreciate you being here.
Welcome.
We wanted to do the show earlier this week and try to stay on the once a week thing, but life caught up, and so we're a couple days behind, but hopefully you guys are tuning in and checking it out. So keep sending the emails. We love hearing from you guys. We've gotten so many encouraging emails in different languages and all sorts of stuff. So
we've been exercising our Google Translator.
Yeah, it's been really great, and it's been fun. But keep those coming. You can email us at canarycryradio@gmail.com. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about a couple things. I guess 2012 prep to start off, and then we're going to get into a little more of kind of an apologetic conversation later. But
right. Well, okay. So let me just start this off by saying last week I was just laying in bed. My mind was just racing with all the new information that I was bringing in about, 2012 and the Illuminati. I think we had just done the last show, the Svali show. And, when you start thinking about this stuff a little bit too much, you start to get in a weird headspace. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this. But so I'm laying there, and I'm just starting to realize that, that it's okay. Everything's going to be okay, especially for, you Christians out there. We have a higher hope. And so I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about living in the now with the knowledge of what's to come in the future. I think it's important that we all should just take a step back from all of our research and our prepping and things like that, and just know that we still have a life that we need to live today. And if there's anything that you've just been aching to do all your life, you're running out of time to do it. So maybe take a vacation and to kind of relax the mind a little bit off of all the darkness in the world here. We still have things to live for. Personally, I have a few things I want to get done before 2012. For whatever happens there, whether it's going to be an economic thing or an atomic thing or just the return of Christ, you never know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what about you, Gonz?
Well, I would say that I was watching a CS, or what is it? Whatever MSNBC episode where they did this special called Apocalypse 2012. And they interviewed this NASA scientist, and he's sitting there going, "Oh, this is all hogwash." What they did was they had all these theories. They dwindled it down to like 2 or 3 different theories of what's going to happen.
Right.
And one of them was Planet X, Nibiru coming through, and he's like, "Oh, this is just ridiculous. This is just complete nonsense." And then the poles shifting. It's like, "Oh, that's just retarded." He just says everything is. So I think there was an interesting point of balance that I saw of like, okay, there's people that are there going, there's absolutely nothing's going to happen. And then it ranges to the other side where they showed these people who were so crazy that, about their prep. One guy was, and I guess he's fairly popular for his research in UFO stuff. I had never heard of him before, but this gentleman believed that we live in the Matrix. And on December 21st, 2012 at 11:11 a.m., which is interesting because, that time only occurs in certain time zones. It's not like a universal Earth time, 11:11.
Oh, yeah.
But he believes, I think he lives in like Arizona or something. He believes at 11:11 on December 21st, 2012, the Matrix program that we're in is going to end. So his thing is he's going to go up on this cliff and he's going to jump off the cliff. And he believes that a portal is going to open. And when he enters the portal, he is basically going to stop the Matrix program from stopping, and he's going to basically save the world. Now,
I want to see his sources on what he believes.
I think he's like trying to raise money for it too, to like be documented and stuff like that, which is also interesting. It's like, why would you document? But if I had a chance to speak to him, I would say, "Hey, dude, don't jump." I would say, "Hey, if you are gonna jump, just make sure there is a portal that opens up. Like don't jump before.
Look before you leave."
Yeah, exactly. So there's people that are doing that kind of stuff, and promoting whatever.
Right.
Then there's your people that are doing their prep with guns and food, and certainly those things aren't bad in and of itself, especially with a lot of the economic. Fear mongering that's going on just in general. That stuff is real. We never know. I mean, things can turn in a day or two, and we can be seeing ourselves without access to food and water and those basic essentials. Those things can be either taken away or the price skyrockets, and
right.
There's riots, and I mean those things are real. It's very possible, especially in the kind of climate, the world climate and American climate that we live in now. But I wouldn't go too crazy about it because, especially, for someone like Basil and I, we don't have like the financials to do that, the time of, we can't just like drop stuff. I have a family. I can't just like...
Well, yeah. I mean, the one big part of it is the hysteria of the whole thing.
Right.
Now, don't get me wrong. I do believe that something is happening. Right. And I am aware of the state of the world, and I am aware of the coming certain catastrophic events that are definitely potential, whatever they may be. And so I think knowing that, it's important to make rational decisions based on the knowledge that, you need to balance what you know and separate it out from the hysteria that they want you to feel.
Right.
Because there's a certain control that will come out of this fear of 2012. Because if people are fearing 2012 or fearing whatever is going to happen there, which is just so mainstream now.
Yeah.
That's one thing that worries me, is that this whole thing is so mainstream. The disasters are so apocalyptic, just portrayed in movies and, TV specials and all these sort of things, that it worries me because, okay, so the establishment is embracing this fear that it is contagious when you start sort of stirring the pot of the public with this sort of thing. And so you have people, obviously, who don't think anything's going to happen. Then you have the people who think the Matrix is going to end. And then, it's important to be in a place where something is going to happen. And if if you do your research and you pay attention, something is going to happen, whether it be economic collapse, whether it be World War III, whether it be whatever it may be. It's important to know that. But on the other hand, if for my situation, probably going out into the woods and building a bunker is not the best choice for me right now. And that's sort of the point I'm trying to get across here is, if indeed something is going to happen in 2012, I do want to be prepared, but I don't want to lose the little bit of time left that I have now.
Right, and spend it worrying about what might happen or may not
right.
happen.
If I'm going to end up in an internment camp in 2012 because the complete police state has broken out, I would have wanted to spend my free time from now until then. I keep talking about 2012 like it's something far away. Well, it's the year 2012
We're in the middle
right
of
now.
2012.
Yeah, but we're talking about December
21st, yeah.
So whatever happens, I want to know that, I didn't spend this time worrying about it. I mean, biblically, we're not supposed to worry about the future. Let tomorrow worry about itself.
Right.
And make sure you're still living your life now. Don't be destructive. There's a lot of potential to be destructive in your own life right now, especially compounded with the worry of the end of the world at the end of the year. I mean, whether you believe it's the end of the world or you believe it's the changing of the times and the
spiritual evolution,
or police state or America or a false flag terrorist attack or whatever you think it is.
Right.
It's important to make sure you're living your life now. Don't quit your job quite yet unless you hate it. If you hate your job, quit your job. But, spend time with your family. Make sure you're doing what's right.
Yeah, and I think this is somewhat cliche, especially in the Christian community. But in general, stock up on physical needs is obviously important, but ultimately stock up on spiritual, stuff. Spend time in the Bible, learn your Bible, because, in times of trouble and persecution, there's only going to be one thing that really helps us through those things spiritually and emotionally,
right?
And that's God. No amount of whatever, food or guns or whatever
won't give you peace.
Right.
But my favorite thing is, and this is, I love Western movies and different things like that. And the thing that I always loved was, what was the name of the movie? Anyways, in a lot of different movies, there's always the preacher, whether he's like the classic drunk preacher or just the sort of wimpy preacher who's just sort of, and they just sort of hang around the whole movie. They're just sort of there.
Yeah.
And then at the very last moment in the dire times, it always goes back to this guy, and he's like, "Don't worry, God will protect us." And then he ends up doing it. Like the preacher is always the one inspiring the last hope that gets everybody through. And that's sort of indicative, I think, of a truth that is, when everything goes down, there's really only one resource that we're going to have that's that actually represents a safety of some kind.
Yeah, and we can, in light of what may go down, we can be that light to other people and within our street. If something happens and people come out of their houses and you start talking to your neighbors and stuff like that can be a point of evangelism. That is, what better time than when a meteor hits or something, obviously if it hits you, then you're in a different place. But I find it interesting also that with these the New Agers, a lot of them have this positive spin on 2012.
Right.
And they have this idea, and some of you guys have looked at it. I've looked at it in the past, and one of the people that caught my attention when I first started really looking into this stuff is a guy named David Wilcock. And, obviously he's got a lot of problems with his theories and stuff like that. They're okay, they're interesting, but ultimately, people call him a fraud or whatever. I think he's genuine and he's trying to do something that's, whatever, but at the same time, I think he's deceived in certain ways.
Right.
And his big thing was the galaxy is a living being, this whole kind of Gaia mentality to the Earth. And, on December 21st, 2012, this ring of, spiritual consciousness is going to emit itself from the center of the galaxy, and it's going to hit Earth, and in an instant, we are all going to evolve into the next level. And, his theory is that's why there's missing links in the evolutionary, fossil record, because in the past these rings have hit before and, creatures were instantly changed or whatever.
Right.
So if that happens, I mean, it's like, all right, the New Agers were right, but look at us now. We can communicate psychically and fly and whatever. So, that's another thing that we shouldn't worry about too much. But, if I start seeing people flying around and levitating and things like that as we get closer to December 21st, 2012. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I would do.
I don't know what will happen.
Let me know if you see that, though. I mean,
and I mean, but by no means am I trying to say like, don't prep. Preppers are crazy.
Right.
Because I mean, we've all done our own. I hope we've all done. I've done my own amount of prepping, and there's a lot of different types of prepping. There's the people who want to bunker down and just sort of try to wait out the storm and just kind of survive. Personally, that's not really the way I'm choosing to do it. If things come that close to the end that people have to be hanging out in bunkers for the rest of their lives just to survive, I like to think I'll take more of a badass approach, if you will. So you just gotta you gotta travel light. You gotta have what you need, and if you're gonna want to be moving around, make sure to be prepared in that sort of sense. But a big thing is to prep in the way that is right for you. I mean, think about the things that you're really gonna. The life that you will want to live in a post-apocalyptic sounds so intense because of all the movies, but a post 2012, December 2012 world, whatever you may think that is. Obviously, it's important to have a certain amount of food, which is funny because it's actually it's actually illegal to hoard food. It was a bill passed after World War II or during World War II, and it was another bill just reinstated that to make it illegal to hoard certain materials, things like food, things like guns. So it's just another one of those things that you it's probably a signal that you probably should start preparing for something like that.
I have a garden that my wife and I have been trying to grow in the backyard, and the dogs keep ruining it, and we've been. It's like, guys,
I think your dogs are agents of.
That's what I've been thinking, man. The Illuminati.
Anti-hoarding agency. Well, and there's that other bill. I mean, I don't want to go on a huge rabbit trail here, but there's another bill that's being passed around and being supported by, whatever crazy representatives are supporting it that actually want to make it illegal to grow your own food,
right,
and to share your grown food and things like that. And I mean, that is actually becoming uncomfortably close to becoming a reality. I don't have it right in front of me because I wasn't planning on talking about it. But yeah, I mean, that alone should show you, exactly where things are going. So like I was saying, you got to find the right type of prepping that works for you. You don't want to spend your whole life savings, like we were saying, if you happen to have life savings.
Yeah,
I know
for those
I don't.
of you that have life savings.
So anyways, if you want any more ideas or anything, you can definitely Google it, check it out. Send us an email. I'll help you out.
Yeah, and give us ideas too. I mean, there may be something that we may be totally missing in this entire conversation that, you
Yeah,
think is important. So
if anybody can tell me how to grow vegetables in my backpack, that'd be great. I'm looking for a way to do that right now.
cool. That'll be interesting.
Yeah.
How are you going to get the? Well, anyway, we'll get into that later. Yeah, there's not a whole lot more we can say about that because there's so much stuff out there that's, a lot of it I think is fear mongering, and trying to sell a product.
Well, that's the thing. It's hard to tell what's fear mongering and what's not because like every good deception, there's an amount of truth in there.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to be fooled into thinking that there's no reason to prepare because there more than likely is a reason to prepare. But at the same time, you don't want to buy into this hysteria that will ultimately lead to a control because that's how things are going to come about.
Right.
The police state will come about for our protection. It won't come about for anything else. It will come under the guise of our protection. And if we're all hysterical about 2012 or whatever happens, we're going to buy into it. There are already people buying into it. You can talk to people, and I'm telling them about the police state or whatever, and they're stoked. They for some reason the words police state aren't an alarm for them. That's a big red flag for me. But for them, they actually feel the safety that is supposed to be in those words. Because they're so terrified of terrorists and pandemics
and homeless people that are completely innocent.
Oh gosh, yeah, homeless people. That's
we're referring to Kelly Thomas.
Kelly Thomas, yeah. Go look up Kelly Thomas. The video's out on YouTube.
Yeah.
I know there's an age restriction because it's a pretty graphic video.
Pretty graphic, yeah.
And it's just probably one of the more sad videos that are out on the internet. It's the bunch of cops just beating up a homeless guy for what seems to be no apparent reason. He's it's just very sad. But anyways,
the big thing in the court yesterday with that particular case was the fact that basically they were saying that Kelly Thomas, there's a part of the footage there that he's screaming, I can't breathe, and the way they defended the police officers was like, well, if he really couldn't breathe, then he wouldn't have been able to say he can't breathe.
Right.
And they're saying, oh, it's just an anxiety attack that he was having. But you watch the film and it's like, no, they were beating the snot out of this guy. And he's on the ground. You got 6 cops on. I mean, it's just like, what? And if you guys don't know what we're talking about, Kelly Thomas, he was a homeless guy on the street. He was not on alcohol or drugs or anything like that. He was pretty much provoked kind of by the cops. He was doing a little provoking too, but it wasn't violent at all.
I wouldn't call it provoking.
I mean, he was just kind of, because the cops was saying, put your hands on your knees, get on the ground. And he was like, well, which one do you want me to do? And
he just knew he was being bullied. That's the thing.
Totally.
He just knew he was being bullied. And I've said this before, and these guys, I mean, I don't know the exact story about these police officers, but in my opinion, a lot of police officers are, to say the least, unstable, especially if they come from a military background. They come with a military mindset. I mean, this is the sort of mentality you see troops in Afghanistan treating the Afghani people or the Iraqi people with over there. It's this sort of like, well, you're an enemy, so I'm not going to treat you like a human being. You're going to listen to me, or I'm going to hit you in the head with my flashlight and tase you. I mean, they tase this guy for an obscene amount of time, and it's just a bizarre thing to watch, to see the brutality that these police, seemingly unprovoked, are. Well, maybe not unprovoked, but
they're looking for a fight almost.
Justified. They're absolutely looking for a fight.
And we're not saying every cop is corrupt and every cop is out there looking for a fight, but it's definitely one of those things that we have seen in the past, and I don't think it is a problem for the academy. They know that, I think they realize that as well. But yeah, Kelly Thomas passed away, and they couldn't save his life, but it was from all the beatings of the cops. So
Yeah.
that's just something that's
And
happening in the
his
news
dad,
right now.
also a little note is that his dad was a retired Orange County Sheriff's deputy,
Right.
and so he was hoping his dad was there somewhere to help him out. But
Yeah, it's kind of sad. He was screaming for his dad in the whole thing, but anyway, that can be that can just be a real snippet of if they lock down and we do see a police state. You better fall in line because
Exactly. I guess that was my point, was that even if the cops aren't looking for a fight, the authority that they carry or seemingly carry with that badge and that uniform,
right,
to them is unquestionable. So it's not about your rights anymore. It's not really about your rights.
Yeah.
And if you've ever come in contact with police, I hope you haven't had this same experience, but I know it's an experience that a lot of people have, is that your rights don't really matter when you're in contact with a police officer.
Yeah.
Because even if you do know your rights and you legally refuse the things you're allowed to refuse, if you legally don't let him do the things he wants to do, that just pisses them off even more, and they'll just find another reason to come at you. And this is not me necessarily talking about any individual cop. This is just on a personal level, not talking about them on a personal level. This is me talking about the mentality that sort of is bred when you give those people power like that.
Yeah. And I would say both of us would be susceptible to the same kind of, I guess, superiority complex if we were given the opportunity. If I'm rolling around in a police car, there's a certain level of I'm the man, I'm the law. Obviously there's a responsibility that comes with that and a risk that they're taking with that. But at the same time, with great power comes great responsibility.
Right. I don't think these guys are born into this sort of crazy mentality. It's definitely something that's bred, through just what the uniform represents, and because you see it time and time again. And then you extend that out into a police state where they're even given more power, and it just becomes a disaster for anybody who's anybody necessarily.
Yeah. Well, kind of moved away from the 2012 thing but I guess wrapping up the whole 2012 conversation, or at least just the whole apocalyptic conversation, like Basil said, do the prep that you believe you need to do. I would contend that the spiritual preparation is probably the most important, just to be aware of what's going on, but also be spiritually stocked up. I think, when you see a lot of the persecution that happened just within the Bible of people who believed in God and people who, risked their lives or lost their physical lives at least, for the cause of, declaring and speaking the gospel. We have to be prepared for that. I think that's a whole nother topic of dying, I suppose dying with a sense of a surety or a sense of knowing that this life is not the end all be all. But that's a very difficult thing to face. It's one of those things that I know I've struggled with, but at times I've really felt like, okay, you know what? My convictions are so strong that I am willing to die for it. If a cop came to me and we were in a police state or whatever, and I was holding a Bible and they said, let go of the Bible or I'll shoot, or, whatever the situation may be, I don't know. That's a real tough one. You know what I mean? Because essentially what you're saying is either bow down to the system and keep this life or renounce your faith. And, I don't know how many people are prepared to actually stick up for what they believe in, even if they call themselves a Christian or whatever, whatever faith you're in.
Well, yeah, and especially there's a lot of evidence to point towards that being a possibility.
Yeah.
In the near future. Christians are so demonized now in the mass
public,
media,
yeah.
in the public, and things like that, and all the other. Okay, I don't want to be so general, but there are a lot of other groups of people who think that Christians are just these bigoted people who just want to control the world. And that's not to say that.
Well, we are. But so is everybody else. So it's not really like, it's the whole plank in the eye thing. It's like you're not free from wanting or having those same ideas. It's like it's reciprocating the hate with hate. It's like you're a hater, but you're using hate to like call someone a hater.
Well, I think that the majority of Christians aren't that.
No, I don't think so either. No, you're right.
Yeah, I think there obviously are. How can I put this gently? Extreme examples of people who might, be a little bit more intense than others in ways that other Christians would not agree with. But I think that the average Christian is not one of the bigoted mass media,
right, and
Christians that they want you to think. The average Christian does not, want to, throw all of his sinner friends into a closet with a Bible and make them lash themselves. Like, like literally, like you see that on TV all the time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is the media paints and grabs these real extreme cases and then they portray, like, for example, when you watch some of these news shows, I don't know how many clips I've watched of the Westboro Baptist Church, which represents what? The church has 100 members or something, and like half of them are family.
Less than that.
Yeah, and they come on TV and they're going crazy about all this stuff, and it's like if you're a general public watching that, you're like, whoa, Christians are crazy, Christians are insane, but that that's perception. That's not necessarily reality, but obviously there's that whole debate of perception painting reality or whatever, but. That's right. Kind of what's going on, and I don't think, or burning the Quran, that was a big thing a while ago. I don't think Christians in general are sitting there going, we need to burn every, I don't think that's what's going on, so I agree with you there.
Right. One funny thing that I heard a few days ago was the Ku Klux Klan actually was protesting against the Westboro Baptist Church. The other day.
That's interesting.
So I mean, that just takes it to a whole new level. When the Ku Klux Klan is protesting you, I mean, there might need to be some inner dialogue within the congregation to reassess your mission in the world at that point.
I'm siding with the atheists there and like putting them on an island or something, and
I'll agree
just
to
letting them figure it out or whatever.
Yeah.
Speaking of atheists, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about today was I engage in a lot of conversations online and in person too, but I think online is very interesting because people don't hold back what they're thinking, and it's hard to like translate exactly the emotion, but because
you don't have to save face.
Right. There's no.
You don't have to seem reasonable, even if you know that you're crazy.
Yeah. There's no like true accountability. It's just kind of like whatever.
Right.
So I go around some of these forums and different places on the internet and just have conversation. And partly, sometimes I'm not necessarily looking to provoke, but I'm looking for opportunities to converse with people very legitimately, and test to see, okay, how much do I really know my faith? How much do I really know my stuff? It's kind of a gauge for me of like, okay, where am I at with stuff? Because I think if I'm just like reading and doing all this, all this stuff, I know I'm retaining information, but to be able to explain it to someone or converse with someone about it, it gives you a whole different level of understanding. It's like a teacher, or if you've ever coached something, you tend to learn about that thing much more than just sitting there listening about it or doing it.
Right.
So that's kind of my philosophy with that, and I go to these forums and I run into a lot of atheists in a couple of these forums, and I do my best to keep the conversation about the topic at hand, which sometimes I'm definitely guilty of, like, well, you're not, good lashing out or whatever. But I think I've gotten a lot better with that. And
Right.
most of the time, the conversation turns from the topic to actually like ad hominem attacks of like, well,
Yeah.
you're an idiot because you're a Christian. And it's like, that's not even answering my question,
Yeah.
and there's a few people that I've conversed with over time that they're so unwilling to talk about certain things. They'll say, there was a gentleman I was talking to about objective moral values about, and it's like this guy is saying, no, morals are relative, and we kind of ended the conversation prior to this, and then I came back and there was another moment of like, hey, we were having this conversation, and so I asked you a question, you never answered it. So I asked the question again, which was basically, how do you differentiate between right and wrong?
Yeah.
Something along those lines. And his whole response was like, we've already had this conversation. I can't help your incompetence. And like, just going off
Yeah.
on me. And it's like, okay, whatever. But the one particular topic I wanted to talk about was this whole idea. And I know we're not like, this whole show of Canary Cry Radio isn't necessarily about apologetics, but we'll throw in some pebbles once in a while. The atheists always talk about how the Christians, or the theist for this instance, need to provide evidence. And so, I always ask, define evidence. But even before that, they say we don't need to provide evidence. And how they do this is they say that they are agnostic atheists.
Mm-hmm.
And so I pick their brain a little bit. I go, what do you mean? Well, they say, okay, well, I'm an atheist because I don't have a belief in God, but I'm also agnostic because I don't believe you can know if there's a God or not.
Yeah.
Now, those two things are contradictory, right? I mean, the way they worded it makes it sound like it's logical,
Right.
but it's not, because you're saying you can't know if there's a God or not,
But you don't think there
but
is.
you don't think there's a God.
Right.
And the way they use it semantically is they'll say, I don't know if you can know if there's a God or not, therefore I believe there's no God.
Right.
And I mean, again, it sounds kind of, logical on the surface, but it's not, because, there's a very simple way to do this. And I got this from Greg Kokel, and people don't like this because, or at least the atheists, when I converse with them, they don't like this because it, kind of shows the flaw. But this is how I got it from Greg Kokel, who is an apologist. He says, okay, make a preposition and say God exists. That's the preposition. Yes, you're a theist. No, you're an atheist. I don't know, you're an agnostic.
Right.
Right? That's pretty basic. It, gets rid of all the fluff and all the semantic, exercising that goes on.
Right.
Right? So at that point, you can't be it's really clear that you can't be an agnostic and an atheist at the same time, because those are two different positions.
Well, and there's something that kind of comes along with agnosticism, and that's just that, like, they seem a little bit more reasonable,
Right.
to both Christians and atheists, agnostic being right in the middle. There's a little bit of common ground for either side there. So to me, I've run into people who call themselves agnostics, and it's just so obvious, because to call yourself an agnostic sort of defuses a lot of the responsibility. So a legitimate agnostic, you can at least have a conversation and have a civil conversation about, like, oh, well, why don't you know? Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, and either side can sort of talk to them about and sort of keep it civil at the same time, just because agnostic in general is sort of this middle ground. So I feel like a lot of atheists love to tag on that agnostic title,
So they don't have to prove, or they don't have to give a reason for why they don't believe God exists.
Because you don't have to explain anything. If you truly are agnostic, you're saying, well, I'm not really sure either way. There could, there couldn't. I don't know.
Right.
But if you're an atheist agnostic, you say, you don't really know. There could, there couldn't, but there's not. Which just is childish.
Right. And they try to, again, they twist the definitions in a certain way to like make it fit their paradigm. And when they say, this is what I hear constantly from them, is they say, and it's not an us and them thing, but this is just, you know,
from some atheists
that I've talked to. Yeah. They'll say agnosticism is a knowledge claim, and atheism or theism is a belief claim. So they try to like differentiate those things.
Right.
But here's my point, is that you can't have a belief without having information that leads to knowledge and ultimately leads to a belief. So you can't just believe something without having the knowledge about it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's a non-belief is, if you're an agnostic and you say I have a non-belief, or if you have a non-belief in anything, then you don't have the proper information or the knowledge to make a claim. That's what it means, right? Like, you know, if the question was like, you know, how many people are in the state of Kansas? How many people do you believe are in the state of Kansas? Where it's like, oh, I have a non-belief because I don't have enough information to actually say one or the other.
Right.
So that's agnosticism at its, you know, that's an example of it. You just don't know. We don't have the information. And so I don't know. It's just, it really bothers me when they try to
it's literally what the word translated out to, agnostic.
Right.
There's no knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and they have this little chart that shows
the chart's funny.
We'll
post the chart in the show notes, and then we'll try to post a corrected chart.
Yeah.
Because it just shows this. They're just I keep saying that this certain person is it's just funny. They just love to try to be agnostic at the same time.
Right. And so the chart basically shows Gnosticism on one side and you know, theism, atheism on another side. And basically there's 4 different categories. There's the Gnostic theist, which means you believe God exists and you believe that there's adequate proof or reasons to know that God exists. And then there's, interestingly, agnostic theist, which means you believe in God, but you don't believe you can know that God exists. Anyway.
It's just the same thing.
And then there's the Gnostic atheist that says, I don't believe God exists, but I can say, or did I say agnostic? Yeah, so I don't know. And, at the same time, we don't know if we can know that God exists or not.
Right.
And then there's the Gnostic atheist who says, I don't believe God exists, but there is a way to know if God exists or not.
Right. But and it separates it out into 4 columns.
Yeah.
And really there's only 3.
Yeah.
And it's just, some people I feel like there's a lot of social pressure involved in the whole thing, because people, or not even social pressure, just a sort of a cognitive dissonance when it comes to agnosticism. There are true agnostics. I do believe that there are true agnostics.
Yeah.
But people, some people are afraid to be on either side of the line. Maybe they call themselves an atheist, but that doesn't quite feel right.
Right.
It doesn't quite feel right. So
they're not ready to say that God doesn't exist, and hold that position.
But they want to stay. They want to stay on that side of the line, but something doesn't feel right, so they'll just tag agnostic on there. I'm an agnostic atheist, which I can give some leeway for people who are just having an inward battle with themselves, which I feel like a lot of these people are.
Yeah, I think that is.
So, don't think that I think they're stupid. I just think that they haven't quite worked things out yet.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think the very fact that somebody would tag on agnostic onto their atheism or onto their theism shows that they're still in the process of figuring things out. They don't quite have things figured out. But.
Yeah, and I'm sure everybody has heard, where's the evidence? What proof do you have? And if you ever come across somebody that asks you for scientific proof that God exists, that person's being disingenuous, because science doesn't prove things. Science will give an explanation, and things are falsifiable, but it doesn't actually prove anything. That's not.
Well, science can tell us if something exists,
Right.
But science cannot tell us that something does not exist.
Right.
Science cannot tell us that there is a, this is an argument that I got into when I was just a little boy. Stars, right?
Yes.
The 5-pointed stars. As a kid, that's what is in the sky, those 5-pointed stars.
Right.
And I got into an argument with a friend of mine, and he said, there are no 5-pointed stars in the sky. Stars are circles. And then I remember saying, yeah, the ones that we've seen are circles. But who knows? There might be one with, 5 points out there. And I mean, obviously I'm a little kid, so a lot of this is just my imagination and wanting to think that the stars in Super Mario Brothers are out in the sky somewhere.
Right.
And I mean, eventually I got shut down because, yes, science right now just tells us that stars are balls of gas. But in my later years, I'm finding out that that is actually unscientific. It is fundamentally unscientific to say that there's a star out there. There's no star out there with 5 points because we haven't seen it.
Right.
And Feynman will agree with me. All the great scientists will agree with me.
Yeah.
That to say that something does not exist because we have not seen it is an unscientific standpoint. And that right there is a point that a lot of atheists or a lot of agnostics don't like to think about.
Right. And there's so many different kinds of evidence. There is your material evidence, and obviously a lot of science depends on a lot of these in the material realm of nature. And you're never going to prove something that is supposed to be immaterial, like God or spirituality in general, by looking at material stuff. I mean, you'll see the effects, but you will not see that very thing. And there's all sorts of arguments with the cosmological, ontological, and teleological arguments for the existence of God. A lot of the proof, I believe, is found in logic, which is very interesting because the atheists or just in general, the non-believing world tries to say, well, we believe in reason, we believe in rationality, and
reason shall prevail.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't use reason to justify their claims. But just a real basic way to explain to someone how there might be a God, if you have family or friends that don't believe in God. It's really interesting and it's really basic. So basically, all you got to ask them is, do you believe in the laws of logic? The laws of math, the laws of science, the laws of absolute morality. Well, morality, I think people have a tendency to debate with more. But logic and mathematics, those two things, the laws of logic and mathematics, I don't think anyone will dispute that, right? No one says no, the laws of logic don't exist.
Right.
No one's ever going to say that. So most people agree there. Okay, we've established that the laws of logic and mathematics exist. Now, are they material or immaterial? And this is a point that I got into a conversation with a couple days ago. I think it's immaterial. I think the laws of logic and mathematics are immaterial. And how do I say that? Well, if you say it's material, then you would have to show me the physical number 3, for example.
Right.
Where in the universe is the physical number 3? Not the number 3 written out and represented, not 3 objects, but the actual number 3. It's
right.
not. It doesn't exist in the material universe. It just doesn't. And so I believe it's immaterial. And I also believe it's universal. I don't think, there could be no human beings in the entire universe, and a number 3 will still exist. 1 + 1 will still equal 2. You know what I mean? Within the universe, not outside of it, obviously. But
Right.
and then you also have to ask if it's unchanging or if it's changing. And again, if it's universal, if it's immaterial, it's probably unchanging, right? At least within the context of this universe. So it's universal, it's immaterial, it's unchanging. And those concepts are consistent with a Christian understanding, or at least a theistic understanding of God. He's
Right.
universal, he's immaterial, he's unchanging. And without that external mind, an intelligent mind external to the physical and material world, without that there, nothing in the material world makes sense. There is no laws of logic. There are no laws of physics or mathematics. Those things don't exist, and we don't have the rationality to even comprehend those things.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know. I'm probably going off on a little soapbox tangent.
No,
here,
no,
but,
it's good.
But this is a really basic way to show that, hey, it's not unreasonable to believe in God. In fact, it's probably more reasonable to suggest that there is probably an immaterial mind that imposes itself onto us into the physical world for us to have the ability to, think and rationalize and do mathematics. And, another real basic example of this is, okay, with science and the advent of technology and all these things, we have uncovered that there is no God. Under this rock, there's no God. In the thunder, there's no God. When in the past, people thought that, oh, there's rain coming down, it must be the gods or whatever. And I think, yes, they've debunked, quote unquote, certain superstitions people have had about the material world, but I wouldn't say that it disproves God in any way.
Well, right. That's something that is just a silly argument.
Yeah.
You hear, well, God doesn't exist because we've proved that thunder comes from rain clouds and the electrically charged ions in the clouds. Oh, so there's no God. Oh, okay. Well, that was easy. Well, you know what I mean? Like, what was it? Oh, I don't know. But I mean, it's just these sort of pseudo-logical sort of thought experiments or whatever that sort of quote unquote disprove God.
Yeah. And the real fundamental thing here, and I really try to get people to see this because it's really, really basic. There is information in the world, right? I mean, there is, again, the laws of logic, mathematics, and I think in the conversation we had with Doug Hamp, we talked about how information is immaterial, right? But,
right.
But nevertheless, there is information. For example, the thundercloud. There is a certain mechanism that is bound to certain laws of physics and mathematics that create that thundercloud, right? And us as rational beings, we have been able to determine and explain or describe what's going on, right? That means that the information that we use or that we try to comprehend in what's happening in a thundercloud, that information is there before we understood it.
Right.
That has to show that there is, and information doesn't just come about. I mean, information usually comes from a mind. So that shows that there is an external mind, an external intelligence that has already planned all this out and set in motion these, beautiful things that we can only try to explain in an equation or, an example or words to describe these things. That to me is a real basic way to help people see that, like, hey, you know what? Maybe there is something beyond what we think we know, what we think we understand about the world. And we don't understand anything, really, when it comes down to it. We speculate, and a lot of science has been disproven in the past, and people say, "Oh, that's the
Oh,
beauty of
science
science."
is just constantly being disproven.
Right.
But
But the Bible and the whole concept of theism, that doesn't change. You can't change like your position on believing in God or the Bible itself. You can't like change what it says, you know? So that should be another point of contention of like the biblical account of God, of who he is. He's not just this mind. I mean, he's a personal being, and we can get into all that's a whole nother thing. And this argument that I've been explaining this whole time doesn't necessarily defend the Christian God necessarily. It just defends God, a theistic point of view. But again, those things are very important to separate as well, because oftentimes when I'm having this conversation with people, they'll say, and I've had these moments too, where they're like, well, even granted a God, you have to prove that it's a Christian God. Or why would God, you know, they bring up these different topics. Why would God flood the earth? That's evil of God to do that. So it's very important, I think, for people to understand that you have to stay on topic. If they start bringing these other things in, if you're clever, you'll realize that they've actually granted the fact that a God might exist, because they start giving you these like, well, if he does exist, even granted that God exists, they bring in these different arguments, and that presupposes that God does exist, but they don't like that God because of so and so and so, you know. So you know, but they'll never admit that they believe in God or believe that God exists. I think partly because they don't want to be held accountable for their actions on earth. And, you know, I think that's even true with people that do believe in God, you know. Even if we do believe in God, it's like there's a part of you that's like, oh man, everything I do, everything I think, it's, you know, he knows about that. That's kind of like, oh man, I don't know if I want him to exist, because then he knows everything, and, you know, not everything is pretty, you know. So yeah. Well, I mean, we're also talking about a God who created us, who we are, and understands the human plight because he spent time as a human being, both fully God and fully human. So I mean, there's a lot more compassion in in this God than I think a lot of people like to recognize. Yeah. So it's not necessarily. I mean, I think that's a main part of it is they don't want to think of a God who is, you know, judgmental. Not the great judge, but, you know, judgmental, because they know that just the human condition in general is a fallen one. Yeah. And whether they like to use that sort of language or not. But I mean, that's the great thing about God as we know him, is that he is the epitome of compassion. So and tying it back sort of to, you know, what Canary Cry Radio is sort of about, the idea that a lot of secret societies and just throughout the centuries, mystic ideas, ancient religions in general, with gods, lowercase g gods, they've all looked at these gods as givers of knowledge, givers of, you know, just helping humanity out. In a lot of the mythologies, there are gods that came down and gave man, you know, how to do agriculture and how to make jewelry and all this stuff. And I find it interesting because when the creator God is manifested through an idea of Jehovah in the Old Testament, you know, and the angel of the Lord and things like that, a lot of these esoteric guys see Jehovah as like the evil God. Like he's not the creator God. He's just like another lowercase g God, and he's the bad guy, you know. But the serpent, he's the good guy. You know, he's the one that imparted knowledge and imparted all these things. So that's what's interesting, is that these esoterics and these secret society guys and everything else, they believe in a creator. They believe that there is a grandiose creator God. You know, they are actually theists in that way. Right. So there's a point of agreement there. when things start to splinter and differentiate is when, you go from a theistic to a deistic position of like, yes, God created everything. There is this mastermind God, but it's not Jehovah, it's not Jesus, it's he does not manifest in this world. But there are higher beings of existence, and those are the lowercase g gods, and that's Jehovah, that's Lucifer, that's Satan, whatever, all these, Krishna, Buddha, all these different things. So it's very interesting that, well, obviously maybe not Buddha, because I don't think Buddhism will count as a theistic religion, but but yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind, that these people that are into those things, into the dark side, I guess you can call it, they also believe in God, and I think what's scary and even more alarming is that they believe in Yeshua, or not Yeshua per se, Jehovah. They believe in, well, it's the same being, but in terms of semantics here, they believe in Jehovah God more so, or Yahweh, if you want to call him that, more so than the Christians do. The Christians kind of have this idea of a God, but they don't necessarily believe. I mean, I know they believe it, but they don't. I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Do you know what I'm trying to say, Basil? You want to summarize what I'm trying to say?
I know. Yeah, I can kind of feel what you're saying here. The way that they look at their spirituality, a lot of times, especially when it comes to Yahweh, for the name of the Judeo-Christian God, they have an overwhelming sense of truth that he exists,
right,
along with all these other deities,
right,
and they don't think he's the greatest, which I think is a big point to make, because it's just easier to believe that he exists,
right,
knowing that he's not the greatest one. And it's interesting because you actually do get this feeling, and I'm trying to find the words to put it into, because these illuminists, or these secret society gentlemen, they have more faith. I don't know if faith is the right word. They have more.
They take the spiritual reality more seriously than
way
the
more
average
seriously
Christian.
than the average Christian, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I mean the concept of a wishy-washy Christian is a very common concept.
Yeah, lukewarm.
Lukewarm, exactly. And it seems like if these guys, and I'm sure it has something to do with their material success here, is the fact that they take the spiritual realm incredibly seriously.
Yeah.
Even more so than I think a lot of Christian leaders do.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Well, I think that culturally Christianity has become a business. It's become an institution. Right. Think about the biggest church in America is run by Joel Osteen, right? In Texas, I think.
I believe.
And he wrote that book called Your Best Life Now. The whole concept of Christianity is about an eternal life. It's about this afterlife. It's about a spiritual life. It's not about your best life now, as far as having all the things you want now. That's not the point. In fact, that's actually...
That sells, though.
It sells, yeah. Well, obviously. But that's almost like a counter position to what actual Christianity is about. But you're right. It sells. People love it. It's...
Well, you think a lot of these secret societies, some of these people have, hundreds of years ago, there were men working towards a future that would come hundreds of years later. A normal person they don't get to see the end product, and they know that.
Right.
But they take the spiritual side of it so seriously that they are still willing to do their part to bring about what they think, is their mission.
Right.
Even when they know not even their great grandchildren will see the end that they are working towards.
And there's also that part of the deception as well, I believe, is that a lot of these secret societies are promised, the members of it are promised to become gods themselves. Right. And that's why you have the painting in the
the Ascension of Washington.
Yeah, the apotheosis of George Washington, of him like becoming a god, and there's so they have that belief, and that's their hope. They have that hope in that doing the works on earth here, doing the things that are told of them from the spiritual realm, of like these different things of depopulate the world or whatever, form a one world god. All these different things are part of what they have to do in order to achieve their God status. And what's interesting is they use the Bible quite a bit in part of their argument. They take it out of context. I've heard, for example, the verse, I think it's in Matthew, I don't want to quote it exactly, it's like 7 or 8, where it talks about, not all that will say, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of God. And they take that context and they'll say, oh, we got to do exactly what we are supposed to do here in order to have the privilege to become gods.
Right. That apotheosis of Washington painting, by the way, if some of you don't know, is Google it, check it out. It's just an entertaining painting of George Washington sitting among the clouds, among all of these,
great thinkers and
Greek gods and Roman gods, and it's actually painted on the dome of the U.S. Capitol building, and so it just shows how deeply this. This
is a religion. It really is a religion.
It's a religion, and it's the religion that our country was actually founded on.
Yeah, that's a whole
was the thought that this apotheosis is the goal for. I mean, George Washington is what this painting portrays here. George Washington has become a god.
Yeah, very
among gods.
Among gods, into the family of gods.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing ties into a lot of the transhumanist conversations we've been having. They want to become gods.
Right.
They want to use technology and science and all this stuff to become gods. Right. And so I just find it incredibly interesting that there is this innate nature in man to aspire for, aspire for immortality. It is something that has been with man since the beginning. For example, I wrote an article called A Godlike Brain with a question mark, and it was in response to another article that a gentleman wrote that I found on the Institute of Ethics and, I can't remember the acronym, but it's IEET.org. And basically, I was responding to this guy's article that talked about why, 7 or 8 reasons why we need to have a godlike brain and the different things that we can do to have a godlike brain. So anyway, I wrote that article, and, just a couple weeks ago, I had a response from the guy who wrote the original article. And at first I was like, oh shoot, he found me and, we're going to have this debate or whatever. But he was just he was polite. He's like, oh, it was a very interesting response. And, thank you for the critique. And he's like, but I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist, so I don't believe in God. And I believe it is our responsibility to attain immortality and to create better brains, is what he said exactly, was the quote.
Right.
And so, again, even in that atheistic worldview, there is a spiritual element. And I think oftentimes we think, oh, you're an atheist, you're not spiritual. No. Everybody is spiritual. Right. There is a spiritual component to everybody. Just because you say there's no spiritual reality doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Right.
And so it's just a perfect example of, then why is it that this atheist that doesn't believe in God is trying to do the exact same thing that these deistic, esoteric authors are trying to do as well? So.
Right. That website is the Institute for Emerging
Ethics
Ethics and Emerging Technologies. It's sort of the transhumanism headquarters on the internet.
Yeah,
sort of.
I find a lot of articles there, and usually if I see one that's crazy enough, I'll respond to it in a blog or through the podcast. So
Right. And if anybody's interested, just go check it out. There's a lot of interesting things happening on there.
yeah, cool.
All right.
Well, I think we've exhausted today.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of different bases today. Sorry, we're a little bit jumping around, but I hope you guys found it interesting. And if you have any comments on what you heard today or anything to bring up, just let us know. Send us an email, or I think you can use our contact tab there on the website, or you could tweet us or Facebook us or any of the above.
And I'm posting the video, or I'm making videos now, making each of these episodes into a YouTube video and posting it on YouTube on the Face Like the Sun channel. So you guys can go check that out there. I mean, it's the video, the image is just the image of that Basil comes up with per episode. But
search Canary Cry Radio.
Yeah, you should be able to find it. And that's just another place to have it out there. You know, it's not, you don't have to listen to it there. It's obviously probably better for your bandwidth or whatever if you're just going from the website or podcast. But yeah, I think that's it. And anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thanks everybody for coming in and tuning in. Make sure to check us out on Twitter at Canary Cry Radio. Check us out on Facebook. Just search Canary Cry Radio. Thanks for visiting the website. And yeah, make sure to check out YouTube and share those videos and spread the word.
Cool.
All right, guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.